Chapter 2. After reaching home, Nicholas was at first serious and even dull. He was worried by the impending necessity of interfering in the stupid business matters for which his mother had called him home. To throw off this burden as quickly as possible, on the third day after his arrival he went, angry and scowling and without answering questions as to where he was going, to Mitenka's lodge and demanded an account of everything. But what an account of everything might be Nicholas knew even less than the frightened and bewildered Mitenka. The conversation and the examination of the accounts with Mitenka did not last long. The village elder, a peasant delegate, and the village clerk, who were waiting in the passage, heard with fear and delight first the young count's voice roaring and snapping and rising louder and louder, and then words of abuse, dreadful words, ejaculated one after the other. "Robber! Ungrateful wretch! I'll hack the dog to pieces! I'm not my father! Robbing us," and so on. Then with no less fear and delight they saw how the young count, red in the face and with bloodshot eyes, dragged Mitenka out by the scruff of the neck and applied his foot and knee to his behind with great agility at convenient moments between the words, shouting, "Be off! Never let me see your face here again, you villain!" Mitenka flew headlong down the 6 steps and ran away into the shrubbery. This shrubbery was a well-known haven of refuge for culprits at Otradno. Mitenka himself, returning tipsy from the town, used to hide there, and many of the residents at Otradno, hiding from Mitenka, knew of its protective qualities. Mitenka's wife and sisters-in-law thrust their heads and frightened faces out of the door of a room where a bright samovar was boiling and where the steward's high bedstead stood with its patchwork quilt. The young count paid no heed to them, but, breathing hard, passed by with resolute strides and went into the house. The countess, who heard at once from the maids what had happened at the lodge, was calmed by the thought that now their affairs would certainly improve, but on the other hand felt anxious as to the effect this excitement might have on her son. She went several times to his door on tiptoe and listened, as he lighted one pipe after another. Next day the old count called his son aside and, with an embarrassed smile, said to him, "But you know, my dear boy, it's a pity you got excited. Mitenka has told me all about it." "I knew," thought Nicholas, "that I should never understand anything in this crazy world. You were angry that he had not entered those 700 rubles. But they were carried forward, and you did not look at the other page. Papa, he is a blackguard and a thief. I know he is. And what I have done, but, if you like, I won't speak to him again." No, my dear boy, the count, too, felt embarrassed. He knew he had mismanaged his wife's property and was to blame toward his children, but he did not know how to remedy it. "No, I beg you to attend to the business. I am old. No, Papa. Forgive me if I have caused you unpleasantness. I understand it all less than you do. Devil take all these peasants, and money matters, and carryings forward from page to page," he thought. "I used to understand what a corner, and the stakes at cards meant, but carrying forward to another page I don't understand at all," said he to himself, and after that he did not meddle in business affairs. But once the countess called her son and informed him that she had a promissory note from Anna Mikhailovna for 2,000 rubles, and asked him what he thought of doing with it. "This," answered Nicholas. "You say it rests with me. Well, I don't like Anna Mikhailovna and I don't like Boris, but they were our friends and poor. Well then, this," and he tore up the note, and by so doing caused the old countess to weep tears of joy. After that, young Rostov took no further part in any business affairs, but devoted himself with passionate enthusiasm to what was to him a new pursuit, the chase, for which his father kept a large establishment. Chapter 3. The weather was already growing wintry and morning frosts congealed an earth saturated by autumn rains. The verdure had thickened and its bright green stood out sharply against the brownish strips of winter rye trodden down by the cattle, and against the pale yellow stubble of the spring buckwheat. The wooded ravines and the copses, which at the end of August had still been green islands amid black fields and stubble, had become golden and bright red islands amid the green winter rye. The hares had already half changed their summer coats, the fox cubs were beginning to scatter, and the young wolves were bigger than dogs. It was the best time of the year for the chase. The hounds of that ardent young sportsman Rostov had not merely reached hard winter condition, but were so jaded that at a meeting of the huntsmen it was decided to give them a 3 days' rest and then, on the 16th of September, to go on a distant expedition, starting from the oak grove where there was an undisturbed litter of wolf cubs. All that day the hounds remained at home. It was frosty and the air was sharp, but toward evening the sky became overcast and it began to thaw. On the 15th, when young Rostov, in his dressing gown, looked out of the window, he saw it was an unsurpassable morning for hunting. It was as if the sky were melting and sinking to the earth without any wind. The only motion in the air was that of the dripping, microscopic particles of drizzling mist. The bare twigs in the garden were hung with transparent drops which fell on the freshly fallen leaves. The earth in the kitchen garden looked wet and black and glistened like poppy seed and at a short distance merged into the dull, moist veil of mist. Nicholas went out into the wet and muddy porch. There was a smell of decaying leaves and of dog. Milka, a black-spotted, broad-haunched bitch with prominent black eyes, got up on seeing her master, stretched her hind legs, lay down like a hare, and then suddenly jumped up and licked him right on his nose and mustache. Another borzoi, a dog, catching sight of his master from the garden path, arched his back and, rushing headlong toward the porch with lifted tail, began rubbing himself against his legs. "Oh hoy!" came at that moment, that inimitable huntsman's call which unites the deepest bass with the shrillest tenor, and round the corner came Daniel the head huntsman and head kennelman, a grey, wrinkled old man with hair cut straight over his forehead, Ukrainian fashion, a long bent whip in his hand, and that look of independence and scorn of everything that is only seen in huntsmen. He doffed his Circassian cap to his master and looked at him scornfully. This scorn was not offensive to his master. Nicholas knew that this Daniel, disdainful of everybody and who considered himself above them, was all the same his serf and huntsman. "Daniel!" Nicholas said timidly, conscious at the sight of the weather, the hounds, and the huntsman that he was being carried away by that irresistible passion for sport which makes a man forget all his previous resolutions, as a lover forgets in the presence of his mistress. "What orders, your excellency?" said the huntsman in his deep bass, deep as a proto-deacon's and hoarse with hallooing, and 2 flashing black eyes gazed from under his brows at his master, who was silent. "Can you resist it?" those eyes seemed to be asking. "It's a good day, eh?" "For a hunt and a gallop, eh?" asked Nicholas, scratching Milka behind the ears. Daniel did not answer, but winked instead. "I sent Avarka at dawn to listen," his bass boomed out after a minute's pause. "He says she's moved them into the Otradno enclosure. They were howling there." This meant that the she-wolf, about whom they both knew, had moved with her cubs to the Otradno copse, a small place 1.5 miles from the house. "We ought to go, don't you think so?" said Nicholas. "Come to me with Avarka." "As you please." "Then put off feeding them." "Yes, sir." 5 minutes later Daniel and Avarka were standing in Nicholas' big study. Though Daniel was not a big man, to see him in a room was like seeing a horse or a bear on the floor among the furniture and surroundings of human life. Daniel himself felt this, and as usual stood just inside the door, trying to speak softly and not move, for fear of breaking something in the master's apartment, and he hastened to say all that was necessary so as to get from under that ceiling, out into the open under the sky once more. Having finished his inquiries and extorted from Daniel an opinion that the hounds were fit, Daniel himself wished to go hunting. Nicholas ordered the horses to be saddled. But just as Daniel was about to go, Natasha came in with rapid steps, not having done up her hair or finished dressing, and with her old nurse's big shawl wrapped round her. Petya ran in at the same time. "You are going?" asked Natasha. "I knew you would. Sonia said you wouldn't go, but I knew that today is the sort of day when you couldn't help going." "Yes, we are going," replied Nicholas reluctantly, for today, as he intended to hunt seriously, he did not want to take Natasha and Petya. "We are going, but only wolf hunting. It would be dull for you." "You know it is my greatest pleasure," said Natasha. "It's not fair, you are going by yourself, are having the horses saddled and said nothing to us about it." "No barrier bars a Russian's path, we'll go," shouted Petya. "But you can't." Mama said you mustn't, said Nicholas to Natasha. Yes, I'll go. I shall certainly go, said Natasha decisively. Daniel, tell them to saddle for us, and Michael must come with my dogs, she added to the huntsman. It seemed to Daniel irksome and improper to be in a room at all, but to have anything to do with a young lady seemed to him impossible. He cast down his eyes and hurried out as if it were none of his business, careful as he went not to inflict any accidental injury on the young lady. Chapter 4. The old count, who had always kept up an enormous hunting establishment but had now handed it all completely over to his son's care, being in very good spirits on this 15th of September, prepared to go out with the others. In an hour's time the whole hunting party was at the porch. Nicholas, with a stern and serious air which showed that now was no time for attending to trifles, went past Natasha and Petya who were trying to tell him something. He had a look at all the details of the hunt, sent a pack of hounds and huntsmen on ahead to find the quarry, mounted his chestnut Donets, and whistling to his own leash of borzois, set off across the threshing ground to a field leading to the Otradno wood. The old count's horse, a sorrel gelding called Viflyanka, was led by the groom in attendance on him, while the count himself was to drive in a small trap straight to a spot reserved for him. They were taking 54 hounds, with 6 hunt attendants and whippers in. Besides the family, there were 8 borzoi kennelmen and more than 40 borzois, so that, with the borzois on the leash belonging to members of the family, there were about 130 dogs and 20 horsemen. Each dog knew its master and its call. Each man in the hunt knew his business, his place, what he had to do. As soon as they had passed the fence they all spread out evenly and quietly, without noise or talk, along the road and field leading to the Otradno covert. The horses stepped over the field as over a thick carpet, now and then splashing into puddles as they crossed a road. The misty sky still seemed to descend evenly and imperceptibly toward the earth, the air was still, warm, and silent. Occasionally the whistle of a huntsman, the snort of a horse, the crack of a whip, or the whine of a straggling hound could be heard. When they had gone a little less than a mile, 5 more riders with dogs appeared out of the mist, approaching the Rostovs. In front rode a fresh-looking, handsome old man with a large grey mustache. "Good morning, uncle," said Nicholas, when the old man drew near. "That's it. Come on." "I was sure of it," began uncle. He was a distant relative of the Rostovs, a man of small means, and their neighbor. "I knew you wouldn't be able to resist it and it's a good thing you're going." "That's it. Come on." This was uncle's favorite expression. "Take the covert at once, for my Gurchik says the Illigins are at Korniki with their hounds." "That's it. Come on. They'll take the cubs from under your very nose." "That's where I'm going." "Shall we join up our packs?" asked Nicholas. The hounds were joined into one pack, and uncle and Nicholas rode on side by side. Natasha, muffled up in shawls which did not hide her eager face and shining eyes, galloped up to them. She was followed by Petya who always kept close to her, by Michael, a huntsman, and by a groom appointed to look after her. Petya, who was laughing, whipped and pulled at his horse. Natasha sat easily and confidently on her black Arabchik and reined him in without effort with a firm hand. Uncle looked round disapprovingly at Petya and Natasha. He did not like to combine frivolity with the serious business of hunting. "Good morning, uncle." "We are going too," shouted Petya. "Good morning, good morning." "But don't go overriding the hounds," said uncle sternly. "Nicholas, what a fine dog Trunilla is." "He knew me," said Natasha, referring to her favorite hound. "In the first place, Trunilla is not a dog, but a harrier," thought Nicholas, and looked sternly at his sister, trying to make her feel the distance that ought to separate them at that moment. Natasha understood it. "You mustn't think we'll be in anyone's way, uncle," she said. "We'll go to our places and won't budge." "A good thing too, little countess," said uncle, "only mind you don't fall off your horse," he added, "because, that's it, come on, you've nothing to hold on to." The oasis of the Otradno covert came in sight a few hundred yards off, the huntsmen were already nearing it. Rostov, having finally settled with uncle, where they should set on the hounds, and having shown Natasha where she was to stand, a spot where nothing could possibly run out, went round above the ravine. "Well, nephew, you're going for a big wolf," said uncle. "Mind and don't let her slip." "That's as may happen," answered Rostov. "Carry, here," he shouted, answering uncle's remark by this call to his borzoi. Carry was a shaggy old dog with a hanging jowl, famous for having tackled a big wolf unaided. They all took up their places. The old count, knowing his son's ardor in the hunt, hurried so as not to be late, and the huntsmen had not yet reached their places when Count Ilya Rostov, cheerful, flushed, and with quivering cheeks, drove up with his black horses over the winter ride to the place reserved for him, where a wolf might come out. Having straightened his coat and fastened on his hunting knives and horn, he mounted his good, sleek, well-fed, and comfortable horse, Viflyanka, which was turning grey, like himself. His horses and trap were sent home. Count Ilya Rostov, though not at heart a keen sportsman, knew the rules of the hunt well, and rode to the bushy edge of the road where he was to stand, arranged his reins, settled himself in the saddle, and, feeling that he was ready, looked about with a smile. Beside him was Simon Chekmar, his personal attendant, an old horseman now somewhat stiff in the saddle. Chekmar held in leash 3 formidable wolfhounds, who had, however, grown fat like their master and his horse. 2 wise old dogs lay down unleashed. Some 100 paces farther along the edge of the wood stood Mitka, the count's other groom, a daring horseman and keen rider to hounds. Before the hunt, by old custom, the count had drunk a silver cupful of mulled brandy, taken a snack, and washed it down with half a bottle of his favorite Bordeaux. He was somewhat flushed with the wine and the drive. His eyes were rather moist and glittered more than usual, and as he sat in his saddle, wrapped up in his fur coat, he looked like a child taken out for an outing. The thin, hollow-cheeked Chekmar, having got everything ready, kept glancing at his master with whom he had lived on the best of terms for 30 years, and understanding the mood he was in expected a pleasant chat. A third person rode up circumspectly through the wood, it was plain that he had had a lesson, and stopped behind the count. This person was a grey-bearded old man in a woman's cloak, with a tall peaked cap on his head. He was the buffoon, who went by a woman's name, Nastasia Ivanovna. "Well, Nastasia Ivanovna," whispered the count, winking at him. "If you scare away the beast, Daniel'll give it you." "I know a thing or two myself," said Nastasia Ivanovna. "Hush," whispered the count and turned to Simon. "Have you seen the young countess?" he asked. "Where is she?" "With young Count Peter, by the Zare of rank grass," answered Simon, smiling. "Though she's a lady, she's very fond of hunting." "And you're surprised at the way she rides, Simon, eh?" said the count. "She's as good as many a man." "Of course. It's marvelous. So bold, so easy. And Nicholas? Where is he?" "By the Lyadov upland, isn't he?" "Yes, sir. He knows where to stand. He understands the matter so well that Daniel and I are often quite astounded," said Simon, well knowing what would please his master. "Rides well, eh? And how well he looks on his horse, eh? A perfect picture. How he chased a fox out of the rank grass by the Zaverzhinsk thicket the other day. Leaped a fearful place, what a sight when they rushed from the covert, the horse worth 1,000 rubles and the rider beyond all price. Yes, one would have to search far to find another as smart." "To search far," repeated the count, evidently sorry Simon had not said more. "To search far," he said, turning back the skirt of his coat to get at his snuff-box. The other day when he came out from mass in full uniform, Michael Sidoric, Simon did not finish, for on the still air he had distinctly caught the music of the hunt with only 2 or 3 hounds giving tongue. He bent down his head and listened, shaking a warning finger at his master. "They are on the scent of the cubs," he whispered, "straight to the Lyadov uplands." The count, forgetting to smooth out the smile on his face, looked into the distance straight before him, down the narrow open space, holding the snuff-box in his hand but not taking any. After the cry of the hounds came the deep tones of the wolf call from Daniel's hunting horn, the pack joined the first 3 hounds and they could be heard in full cry, with that peculiar lift in the note that indicates that they are after a wolf. The whippers in no longer set on the hounds, but changed to the cry of Uliuliu, and above the others rose Daniel's voice, now a deep bass, now piercingly shrill. His voice seemed to fill the whole wood and carried far beyond out into the open field. After listening a few moments in silence, the Count and his attendant convinced themselves that the hounds had separated into 2 packs. The sound of the larger pack, eagerly giving tongue, began to die away in the distance. The other pack rushed by the wood past the Count, and it was with this that Daniel's voice was heard calling Uliuliu. The sounds of both packs mingled and broke apart again, but both were becoming more distant. Simon sighed and stooped to straighten the leash a young borzoi had entangled. The Count too sighed and, noticing the snuff-box in his hand, opened it and took a pinch. "Back!" cried Simon to a borzoi that was pushing forward out of the wood. The Count started and dropped the snuff-box. Nastasia Ivanovna dismounted to pick it up. The Count and Simon were looking at him. Then, unexpectedly, as often happens, the sound of the hunt suddenly approached, as if the hounds in full cry and Daniel Uliuliuing were just in front of them. The Count turned and saw on his right Mitka staring at him with eyes starting out of his head, raising his cap and pointing before him to the other side. "Look out!" he shouted, in a voice plainly showing that he had long fretted to utter that word, and letting the borzois slip he galloped toward the Count. The Count and Simon galloped out of the wood and saw on their left a wolf which, softly swaying from side to side, was coming at a quiet lope farther to the left to the very place where they were standing. The angry borzois whined and getting free of the leash rushed past the horse's feet at the wolf. The wolf paused, turned its heavy forehead toward the dogs awkwardly, like a man suffering from the quinsy, and, still slightly swaying from side to side, gave a couple of leaps and with a swish of its tail disappeared into the skirt of the wood. At the same instant, with a cry like a wail, first one hound, then another, and then another, sprang helter-skelter from the wood opposite and the whole pack rushed across the field toward the very spot where the wolf had disappeared. The hazel bushes parted behind the hounds and Daniel's chestnut horse appeared, dark with sweat. On its long back sat Daniel, hunched forward, capless, his disheveled grey hair hanging over his flushed, perspiring face. "Uliuliu! Uliuliu!" he cried. When he caught sight of the Count his eyes flashed lightning. "Blast you!" he shouted, holding up his whip threateningly at the Count. "You've let the wolf go. What sportsman!" And as if scorning to say more to the frightened and shamefaced Count, he lashed the heaving flanks of his sweating chestnut gelding with all the anger the Count had aroused and flew off after the hounds. The Count, like a punished schoolboy, looked round, trying by a smile to win Simon's sympathy for his plight. But Simon was no longer there. He was galloping round by the bushes while the field was coming up on both sides, all trying to head the wolf, but it vanished into the wood before they could do so.